The pen hit the marble floor. That sound, metal on stone, sliced through the Vanden estate's silence like a scream in a cathedral. Damien's hand froze mid-signature, his breath catching somewhere between his chest and throat. The twins stood motionless in the doorway of his study, their matching red dresses suddenly too bright against the room's mahogany walls. One of them pointed. Her small finger trembled as it rose toward the wall behind his desk, where soft lamplight painted gold across an ornate frame. The portrait. That portrait. The one he'd covered for months until last week, when guilt finally convinced him that hiding her face was worse than facing it. "Sir," the girl's voice cracked. "That's our sick mom." The second twin gasped, clutching her sister's arm. Their eyes, wide, wet, disbelieving, darted between Damien's face and the woman in the painting. The woman with the gentle smile and the navy dress. The woman who'd held his hand once in this very room, 7 years ago, before everything shattered. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Ms. Rhea Collins, the foster volunteer who'd brought them, stepped forward. Her clipboard clattered against her hip. "Girls, what are you?" But they weren't listening. They were already moving, their small feet pounding across the Persian rug. Tears carved tracks down their cheeks as they reached the wall, their hands pressing against the canvas like they could somehow pull their mother through it. "Mommy," one whispered. "Mommy, we found you." Damien's lungs forgot how to work. The room tilted. 8 years of carefully constructed walls, of press suits and board meetings and charity galas designed to scrub his conscience clean, crumbled into dust. He'd known Alara had disappeared. He'd heard whispers about a pregnancy, about her moving north. He'd even hired investigators who came back empty. But twins? His twins? Ms. Rhea's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. "Mr. Vanden, I need you to explain something. Right now." The girls turned. Their faces, identical, beautiful, drowning in confusion, searched as for answers he'd buried under marble and money. One of them wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a smear across her red sleeve. "You knew her, Mommy?" she asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Damien's mouth opened, closed. His perfectly rehearsed explanations, the ones he prepared for journalists, for investors, for anyone who might ask about his sudden interest in fostering underprivileged children, dissolved on his tongue. Because standing before him weren't statistics or tax write-offs or redemption projects. They were Alara's eyes, staring back at him. Thunder rolled outside. Rain began tapping against the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Stonefields Hills. The lamplight flickered once, casting shadows that made the portrait seem alive, like Alara herself was watching this moment unfold. Damien's voice came out strangled. "I need to sit down." But he didn't sit. He stood there, paralyzed, while the twins cried for a mother he'd failed to protect. While Ms. Rhea's expression shifted from confusion to something harder, something that looked like recognition. While the mansion, his fortress of silence, finally stopped hiding the truth he'd painted onto its walls. One of the twins touched the portrait's frame. "She told us about a sad man," she said softly. "A rich one. She said he gave her a reason to smile before the world stopped being kind." The air left the room. What did these 7-year-old girls just reveal that Damien never expected to hear again? Damien's knees buckled. Not completely. Not enough to collapse, but enough that his hand shot out, gripping the edge of his desk for balance. The mahogany felt solid under his palm, real, while everything else turned liquid and wrong. Ms. Rhea moved between him and the twins, her body language shifting from professional courtesy to protective barrier in seconds. "Mr. Vanden." Her voice dropped low, meant only for him. "You need to tell me how you know their mother." Right now, he couldn't answer, couldn't form words. Because 3 months ago, when he'd reviewed the foster scholarship applications, he'd seen their last name, Daniels, and felt nothing. No connection. No alarmbes. Alara had never told him her last name during those stolen moments in his father's final weeks. She'd just been Alara, the night nurse with the warm laugh, the woman who'd made him feel human again, the woman his family destroyed. The twins huddled together near the portrait, their red headbands slightly crooked now from tears and trembling. They whispered to each other in that twin language that needed no words, just glances and hand squeezes and shared grief that Damien recognized because he'd carried his own version of it for 8 years. Rain hammered harder against the windows. The study's temperature seemed to drop, or maybe there was just as blood going cold as the implications stacked up like dominoes. If these girls were Alera's daughters, and they were 7 years old, and the timeline matched when she'd vanished. She died 3 years ago, Ms. Rios said, her eyes never leaving his face. Their mother, Alera Daniels, died from an infection that started small but spread because she couldn't afford the right clinic. Because she got turned away from. Vanda Medical Center, Damien finished, the words tasting like ash. My father's clinic. The admission hit the room like a physical thing. Ms. Ria's jaw tightened. One of the twins, Nora, he remembered from the application, or was it Nia, turned to look at him with an expression too old for her face. Too knowing. You're the sad man, she said. Not a question, a statement. Damien wanted to deny it. Wanted to explain that he wasn't the same person who'd stood silent while his father fired Alera, who let family pressure override everything he'd felt. Wanted to tell them that he'd built this mentorship program specifically to undo that kind of injustice, even if he'd never expected it to undo his own. But the words wouldn't come, because they'd be lies. Ms. Ria pulled a folder from her bag. The twins' file, thick with medical records and social worker notes, and God knew what else. She flipped through it with practiced speed, her fingers stopping on a page near the back. Her expression changed, hardened. There's a sealed envelope in here, she said quietly. From Alera, written before she died. It has your name on it. Time stopped. The twins stopped whispering. The rain stopped its rhythm against the glass. Even Damien's heart seemed to pause mid-beat, caught between the man he'd tried to become and the ghosts he'd failed to bury. What? His voice barely registered as sound. Ms. Ria's hand shook as she pulled out a cream-colored envelope, its edges worn like someone had held it often, like Alera had held it. Maybe in those final days when infection burned through her body and no one with money would help. His name, Damien Vanden, was written across the front in elegant script that he recognized instantly because he'd seen it once before on a note she'd left him the morning his father died. Thank you for letting me see you. Even the broken deserve to be seen. She wanted them to find you, Ms. Rios said. If something happened to her. That's what the social worker told me when I took their case. The envelope sat between them on the desk now, a ghost-made paper. The twins watched it like it might explode. Outside, thunder cracked so loud the windows rattled, and the portrait's lamp flickered twice before steadying. Damien reached for the envelope. His fingers brushed its surface smooth, cold, accusing. But before he could open it, one of the twins spoke again. Mommy said the sad man lost someone too, she whispered. She said that's why he understood loneliness. The observation landed like a blade between his ribs. Because Alera had been right. He had lost someone, his mother, to cancer when he was 12. And his father had responded by turning cold, turning cruel, turning their home into a monument to control where love was weakness and compassion was failure. And Damien had learned those lessons too well. Until Alera. Ms. Ria's voice cut through a spiral. Mr. Vanden, I need you to understand something. If you had any part in what happened to their mother, if you benefited from the system that killed her, these girls deserve to know. I deserve to know before I leave them in this house for another second. The accusation hung sharp and clean in the air. Damien looked at the twins, at their tear-stained faces and their matching red dresses and their small hands clutched together for strength. At the portrait of the woman who'd shown him grace when he deserved none. At the sealed envelope containing words from beyond the grave. What truth was Alera about to reveal that could shatter everything Damien had rebuilt? The estate looked different at 2 a.m. Damien stood at his bedroom window, watching rain turn the gardens below into something formless and gray. He hadn't opened the envelope. Couldn't. Not with Ms. Ria and the twins watching, their eyes full of questions he couldn't answer without drowning. So he'd made an excuse, something about needing to verify information about scheduling a proper meeting, about doing this the right way. Ms. Rhea had taken the twins home, but not before giving him a look that said she knew exactly what kind of man stood before her. A coward dressed in expensive suits. The envelope sat on his nightstand now, propped against the lamp like an accusation. He'd carried it upstairs, set it down, circled it for hours like it might attack him. The house staff had gone home. The mansion's 42 rooms echoed with the kind of silence that only money could buy. The hollow kind, the expensive kind, the kind that pressed against your skull until you wanted to scream just to hear something real. Damien had built this place 3 years ago, after his father died and left him everything. After he'd sold off the medical centers, all of them, because keeping them felt like keeping murder weapons. After he'd poured his inheritance into real estate development and charitable foundations and anything that might scrub the Vanden name clean. But you couldn't renovate guilt. He turned from the window, his reflection catching in the darkened glass. A 40-year-old man who'd aged into his father's face without meaning to. Same sharp jaw, same cold eyes, same ability to prioritize image over humanity. His phone buzzed. A text from Ms. Rhea. I did some research. Alara worked for your family for 6 months. Your father fired her 3 days after you were seen talking with her in the garden. She was pregnant. No one helped her. Damien's grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. He remembered that conversation in the garden. Late April, 8 years ago. His father had been dying slowly, painfully, and Damien had been drowning in the responsibility of all. Alara had found him there at dawn, sitting on a stone bench, staring at nothing. She'd sat beside him without asking, let the silence breathe, then said, sometimes the hardest thing about loving someone difficult is knowing when to let them go. He'd looked at her then, really looked, and seen someone who understood loss without pretense. Someone who'd probably held more dying hands than his father had ever bothered to shake while living. Someone beautiful not because of her face, but because of the way she existed in the world. Like kindness wasn't a transaction. They talked for an hour. About nothing. About everything. And his father had been watching from a window. 3 days later, Alara was gone. The house manager, a woman named Constance who'd served his family for 30 years, had delivered the news like she was discussing weather. Your father let the night nurse go. Said we didn't need her anymore. Said she was getting too familiar. Damien had nodded. Accepted it. Because that's what Vandens did. They accepted the cruelty and called it business. He hadn't even asked for her number. Now his phone buzzed again. Another text from Ms. Rhea, this one with an attachment. A photograph. Alara, heavily pregnant, standing outside a free clinic in Richmond. The timestamp read 7 months after she'd been fired. She looked tired, scared, alone. She tried 4 different hospitals before she found one that would take her without insurance. The twins were born premature. She worked 3 jobs to keep them fed. And when she got sick, she waited too long to ask for help because she knew what happened to people like her when they needed people like you. Damien set the phone down before he threw it. The envelope seemed to glow in his peripheral vision, daring him. He crossed the room, picked it up, held it to the light. The paper was thin enough that he could see shapes of words through it, paragraphs. Maybe 3 or 4, written in that same elegant script that had once told him even the broken deserved to be seen. His hands shook as he broke the seal. The letter unfolded in 3 parts, crisp despite its age. And there, at the top, in Alara's handwriting, were words that stopped his heart. Damien, if you're reading this, it means the girls found you. Good. They need to know where they came from, even if it hurts. He sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress sinking under weight that felt like more than just his body. Rain continued its assault on the windows. Somewhere in the house, pipes groaned with water pressure. The lamp on his nightstand hummed its electrical song. And Damien began to read the truth he'd spent 8 years running from. I never blamed you for your silence. I blamed the world that made you choose it. But our daughters, yes, ours though I never asked you to claim them, they deserve better than silence. They deserve a father who chose courage over comfort. The words blurred. He blinked hard, refusing tears, but they came anyway because some things you can't control no matter how many mansions you build around them. I'm writing this from a hospital bed I can't afford. The infection spread because I waited. Because people like me always wait, hoping our bodies will fix themselves since the system won't fix us. The girls are with a neighbor. They're 5 years old now. They ask about their father sometimes, and I tell them he was a good man who forgot how to be brave. Damien's breath came in short gasps. The room tilted. He forced himself to keep reading, even though every word felt like a knife. I'm not angry anymore. Anger takes energy I don't have. But I need you to know something. They have your smile. Nora gets it when she's concentrating. Nia gets it when she's being mischievous. And when I see it, I remember the morning in the garden when you looked at me like I was real, not just hired help. His hands crumpled the paper, smoothed it again, crumpled it. The rain outside became a roar. If you find them, don't apologize. Apologies mean nothing to children who've already lost too much. Just show up. Be present. Love them the way your father never taught you how. And if you can't do that, if you're still the man who chose silence, then let them go. Don't haunt them the way you haunted me. With grace, Ilera. The letter ended there. No signature beyond her name. No dramatic declarations. Just a dying woman's final request that her daughters be loved better than she was. Damien folded the letter carefully, his hands steadier now despite the tears. He sat on the nightstand beside the envelope. Outside, the storm began to ease, rain softening from violence to whisper. And in the silence that followed, surrounded by marble and money and monuments to his own redemption, Damien Vanden made a decision. He pulled out his phone, texted Ms. Rhea, "Bring them back tomorrow. I need to tell them the truth." Her response came within seconds. What truth? He stared at the question, at the cursor blinking like a heartbeat, and typed the only answer that mattered. That I'm their father, and I've been a coward. How would two 7-year-old girls react when the man with their mother's portrait confessed he was the father who abandoned them before they were born? Morning light hit the portrait differently. Damien stood in his study, coffee untouched on his desk, watching how dawn turned the painting's gold frame into something almost alive. He'd been here since 5 a.m., rehearsing words that sounded hollow no matter how many times he rearranged them. Behind him, the room had been transformed. The leather chairs moved closer, the intimidating desk pushed aside, the space made smaller and warmer, because children shouldn't have to receive life-altering news in a room that felt like a courtroom. His phone showed 9:47 a.m. Ms. Rhea had texted that they were 13 minutes away. 13 minutes until everything changed. He called his lawyer at midnight, then his accountant, then his therapist, a woman named Dr. Imani Price, who'd been trying for 2 years to convince him that charity work wasn't the same as healing. She'd listened to his confession about the twins, about Ilera, about the letter, and then said something that made him want to throw the phone across the room. Damien, you can't buy your way out of abandonment. You have to feel your way through it. Feel. As if he hadn't been feeling everything all at once since the moment those twins pointed at the portrait. As if his chest hadn't been cracked open and bleeding for the past 14 hours. But Dr. Price was right. She was always right. Footsteps in the hallway. Damien's spine straightened automatically, that old Vanden instinct to appear composed even when drowning. But he caught himself, forced his shoulders to drop, reminded himself that these children didn't need the polished version. They needed the real one. The door opened. Ms. Rhea entered first, her expression unreadable. Behind her came Nora and Nia, their red dresses replaced with matching yellow sundresses that made them look younger somehow, more fragile. They held hands, always holding hands, he noticed, and their eyes went immediately to the portrait. "Mr. Vanden," Ms. Rhea said carefully, "the girls wanted to come, but I need you to understand that if this goes badly, it will go badly," Damien interrupted, his voice rougher than intended. "There's no version of this that doesn't hurt, but they deserve the truth anyway." Nora's grip on her sister's hand tightened. Nia's bottom lip trembled. They stood just inside the doorway, caught between curiosity and fear, while Damien tried to figure out how to dismantle his own armor in front of witnesses. "Would you like to sit?" He gestured toward the chairs he'd arranged. "I have juice boxes. And cookies. I wasn't sure what kind you liked, so I got several." It was the cookies that did it. Nia's face softened slightly, and she glanced at her sister in that wordless way twins communicated. Nora nodded. They moved forward together, a unit, and settled into the chairs like small birds on unfamiliar branches, ready to fly at the first sign of danger. Ms. Rhea remained standing, positioned between Damien and the girls like she'd throw herself in front of them if needed. He appreciated that, respected it. These children had lost too much already to trust easily. Damien pulled a chair to face them, close, but not too close. He sat, and immediately realized sitting put him at eye level with them. Made him less intimidating, more human. He'd never felt less human in his life. "I want to tell you about your mom," he began, then stopped because one of the twins, Nora, shook her head. "We know about Mommy," she said quietly. She told us stories before she got too sick, about how she took care of people, about how she was strong even when the world wasn't nice. She said nice people still exist, Nia added, her voice small, even when the world makes them hide. The words hit like physical blows. Damien's carefully rehearsed speech evaporated. All the legal phrases and gentle explanations he prepared turned to dust because these children weren't asking for explanations. They were asking for something more basic. Honesty. "Your mom was right," Damien said. "Nice people do exist. And she was one of them. The best one I ever met." "Did you love her?" Nora asked suddenly. The question hung in the air like smoke. Ms. Rhea tensed. Damien felt the ground shift under him because children didn't ask loaded questions. They asked true ones. "Yes," he said simply. "I did. I still do. But I was scared, and when people are scared, they sometimes make terrible choices. Like not helping her when she needed help." Nia's voice carried no accusation, just confusion. Ms. Rhea said Mommy needed help, and nobody with money would help her. Damien's throat closed. He nodded because words wouldn't come. "Why?" Nora pressed. "If you loved her, why didn't you help?" There it was. The question he'd been asking himself for 8 years. The one that woke him at 3 a.m. and followed him through charity galas and foundation launches and every attempt to prove he was better than his father's son. "Because I was weak," Damien said, his voice breaking on the last word. "Because I let my family tell me who I should love and who I shouldn't. Because I was taught that money mattered more than people. And by the time I learned how wrong that was, your mom was gone." The twins stared at him. Ms. Rhea's expression shifted from protective to something softer, something that looked almost like pity. "I didn't know about you," Damien continued, the words spilling out now. "I didn't know she was pregnant. If I had, would you have helped?" Nora interrupted. "Or would you have been scared then, too?" The question was a knife, sharp and clean. And Damien knew the answer. The real answer, not the comfortable one, was that he probably would have been scared then, too. Because 8 years ago, he was still his father's son, still trapped in the belief that image mattered more than integrity. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to say yes. I want to believe I would have been brave. But I wasn't brave then. I'm trying to be brave now." Nia looked at her sister. They had that silent conversation again, eyes and small gestures carrying volumes. Then Nia turned back to Damien. "Are you the sad man Mommy talked about?" "Yes." "Are you our daddy?" The room stopped breathing. Ms. Rhea's hand went to her mouth. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed to freeze mid-beam. And Damien, successful real estate mogul, philanthropist, man who'd rebuilt his family name from ashes, felt his entire world narrow to 2 7-year-old girls in yellow sundresses who just asked the only question that mattered. "Yes," he whispered, "I am." What happened next was something no amount of wealth or planning could have prepared him for. Nora stood first, not quickly, not like she was running toward or away from anything, but deliberately like she'd made a decision that required physical action to confirm. Her yellow dress swished as she moved, and her hand slipped free from Nia's for the first time since they'd entered the room. Damien watched her approach, his body frozen, unsure if he should stand or stay seated or spontaneously combust from the weight of the moment. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see him clearly, far enough to retreat if needed. "Mommy said you had sad eyes," Nora observed, her head tilting. She was right. Damien's vision blurred. He blinked hard, trying to hold himself together, but 7 years of grief and guilt don't just dissolve because you've finally confessed. They transform, become something heavier and more complex, and right now they were crushing his chest with the realization that his daughter, was standing before him, analyzing his face with her mother's precision. "Do you want to be our daddy?" Nia asked from her chair, her voice smaller than her twins, but carrying the same weight. "Or do you just feel bad?" Ms. Rhea made a sound that might have been protest, but Damien raised a hand to stop her because these questions weren't cruel. They were necessary. These girls have been abandoned once already. They needed to know if they were about to be abandoned again. "Both," Damien said, forcing himself to meet their eyes. "I do feel bad. I feel terrible about every choice I made that hurt your mother. But I also want to be your father, not because I feel guilty, but because you're mine. And I've already wasted 7 years not knowing you." Nora took another step closer, then another, until she was standing directly in front of him, near enough that he could see flecks of gold in her brown eyes that matched Ilara's exactly. She reached out slowly, tentatively, and touched his cheek. "You're crying," she said, sounding surprised. "Yes," Damien confirmed, not bothering to hide it. "Mommy cried a lot toward the end," Nora continued, her small hand still on his face. "But she said crying wasn't weak. She said it meant you still cared about things when the world tried to make you stop." The words shattered what remained of Damien's composure. A sob broke free, raw and ugly and completely uncontrolled. He'd spent 8 years building walls, and this 7-year-old girl had demolished them with a single touch and her mother's wisdom. Nia appeared beside her sister. They stood together, bookends, watching their father fall apart in his $1 million study under a portrait of the woman they'd all lost. "If you're our daddy," Nia said slowly, "can we live here? With you? And Mommy's picture?" Ms. Rhea stepped forward. "Girls, it's not that simple. There are legal processes, evaluations, home studies." "I'll start the paperwork today," Damien interrupted, his voice hoarse. "I'll do whatever it takes. However long it takes. I'm not disappearing again." The twins looked at each other, had one of those silent conversations that seemed to involve their entire beings. Then Nora did something that would replay in Damien's mind for the rest of his life. She hugged him, just wrapped her small arms around his neck, and held on like he might vanish if she let go. Nia followed immediately, and suddenly Damien was surrounded by his daughters. These children he'd never known existed until yesterday, and they smelled like strawberry shampoo and innocence, and everything he'd thought he'd lost the right to hold. His arms came up slowly, carefully, like he might break them if he squeezed too tight. But they didn't break. They pressed closer, and one of them whispered against his shoulder, "Mommy said you'd come back if you ever found us. She said to give you a chance to be brave." The room swam. Damien buried his face in their hair and held his daughters while Ms. Rhea watched with tears streaming down her own face, and a morning light painted everything gold. They stayed like that for a long time. Long enough for Damien to memorize the weight of them. Long enough for the twins to decide he was solid enough to trust. Long enough for the portrait on the wall, Ilara's portrait, to witness the moment silence finally broke. When they finally pulled back, Nora looked up at him with serious eyes. "We have rules if you're going to be our daddy." "Okay," Damien said, willing to agree to anything. "You have to be nice to people who don't have money," Nia said. "Like Mommy was." "You have to tell the truth even when it's scary," Nora added. "And you have to keep Mommy's picture where we can see her," they said together. Damien nodded, unable to speak, but he must have communicated agreement somehow, because both girls smiled, small, tentative smiles that looked exactly like Ilara's had that morning in the garden. Ms. Rhea cleared her throat. "Mr. Vanden, I need to be honest with you. The adoption process for a single father, especially one with your history regarding their mother, is going to be complicated. Social services will scrutinize everything. Your finances, your home, your motives. Let them," Damien said firmly. "I have nothing to hide anymore. There will be questions about why you didn't search for them before, about your father's medical centers and what happened to Ilara, about whether you're doing this out of genuine love or public image management. I can't control what people think," Damien replied, his hands resting on his daughter's shoulders. But I can control what I do from this moment forward, and I'm choosing them. Every time, no matter what it costs. Nora tugged his sleeve. Can we have the cookies now? The question was so perfectly childlike, so delightfully normal after the emotional devastation of the past hour, that Damien laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in longer than he could remember. Yes, he said, you can have all the cookies. As the twins settled back into their chairs with juice boxes and chocolate chip cookies, chattering to each other about which bedrooms they wanted if they got to move in, Damien caught Ms. Ria's eye. She studied him for a long moment, her expression shifting from skepticism to something that looked cautiously like approval. Don't make me regret this, she said quietly. I won't, Damien promised. I swear on everything I have I won't. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Sunlight broke through the clouds, streaming through the study windows and illuminating the portrait with such intensity that Alara seemed to glow. And maybe it was grief or hope or just exhaustion. But for a moment, just a moment, Damien could have sworn she was smiling. But as the twins laughed and MS, Ria began pulling adoption paperwork from her bag. None of them noticed the black sedan that had pulled up to the estate's gates, or the woman inside it, holding a legal folder marked Vanden Estate. Inheritance dispute, her face sharp with the kind of determination that only came from family members who'd been written out of wills. What secret from Damien's past was about to threaten the fragile family he'd just begun to build. The doorbell rang at exactly 10:34 a.m. Damien's head snapped toward the sound, his body going rigid in a way that made both twins pause mid-bite of their cookies. Ms. Ria frowned, checking her phone like she'd missed an appointment notification. But Damien already knew, in that animal way people know when danger approaches, that whoever stood at his door wasn't here for paperwork or pleasantries. I'm not expecting anyone, he said, standing. Ms. Ria, could you stay with the girls? But before she could answer, the study door burst open. Not violently, but with enough force to make it clear that whoever entered believed they had the right to do so. A woman strode in, late 50s, impeccably dressed in a cream pantsuit. Her silver hair swept into a style that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her eyes scanned the room with predatory precision, landing first on the portrait, then on the twins, finally settling on Damien with an expression that mixed disgust and satisfaction. Aunt Vivian, Damien said flatly, you weren't invited. Family doesn't need invitations, Damien. Her voice carried the particular cruelty of old money and older grudges. She held up a leather folder, her red nails clicking against it. Though I wish I'd known you were entertaining guests, particularly such unexpected ones. Nora and Nia shrank back in their chairs. Ms. Ria moved instinctively to block Vivian's line of sight to them, but the woman had already seen everything she needed to see. Let me guess, Vivian continued, her smile sharp as broken glass. These are the charity cases from your little mentorship program. How touching. Though I must say, bringing them to the mansion seems excessive. Unless, her eyes flicked to the portrait again, recognition dawning. Oh, this is rich. Leave, Damien said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Now, I don't think so. Vivian moved deeper into the room, her heels clicking against marble like countdown timers. You see, I've been doing some research since your father's was executed. Curious things, Wills, especially when they contain clauses about moral character and family legacy. Damien's blood went cold. Ms. Ria's hand found her phone, but she didn't dial. Not yet, just held it ready like a weapon. Your father, Vivian continued, savoring each word, included a provision that his estate could be contested if you engaged in behavior that contradicted Vanden family values. Affairs with staff, for instance. Illegitimate children. The kind of scandal that destroys carefully built reputations. Those clauses don't hold up in court, Damien shot back. My lawyers already. Your lawyers didn't know about them. Vivian opened her folder, pulling out documents that looked official and damning. Because your father kept this file separate, private, and he left it with me. His sister, the only person he trusted to protect our name if you proved to be as weak as your mother." The room tilted. Nia started crying quietly, and Nora wrapped an arm around her sister, both of them staring at Damien like they were watching him disappear. "If you pursue custody of these children," Vivian said, her voice sweet as poison, "I will contest the entire inheritance. The mansion, the foundations, the trust fund your father left for community development, all of it goes into legal limbo. Years of court battles, media coverage, every ugly detail of your little romance with the help exposed for the world to judge." Ms. Rhea stepped forward. "You can't blackmail him into abandoning his own children." "Can I?" Vivian's smile widened. "Watch me. Because I'm not just protecting money, Ms. Collins. I'm protecting the Vanden legacy from a man who thinks he can erase his mistakes with adoption papers and good intentions." "They're not mistakes," Damien said, his voice shaking with rage he hadn't felt in years. "They're my daughters." "Then choose," Vivian replied coldly. "Your daughters and poverty, or your fortune and the ability to actually help people on the scale you've been doing. The medical foundations, the housing initiatives, the scholarships, all gone if you pursue this. Is your guilt worth more than the thousands of people who benefit from your wealth?" The question hung in the air like a noose, because Vivian had found the one lever that might actually work, the exact moral calculation designed to trap someone who'd spent years trying to atone for his father's sins. Nora's small voice cut through the tension. "What's she saying? Are we your mistake?" "No," Damien said immediately, dropping to one knee in front of them. "Never. You are the best thing I never knew I had." "Then why is she being mean?" Nia whispered. "Because some people measure worth in money instead of love," Ms. Rhea answered, her eyes locked on Vivian with open hostility. "And they can't understand when someone chooses differently." Vivian laughed, actually laughed, like this was all some amusing game. How poetic. But poetry doesn't pay legal fees. "So here's what's going to happen, Damien. You're going to very publicly end this adoption process. You're going to issue a statement about how you realized you weren't equipped to be a single father. And these girls are going to go back into the foster system where they belong." "Over my dead body," Damien growled. "That can be arranged," Vivian said lightly. "Not literally, of course, but socially, professionally, financially. I can destroy you, nephew. And I will, because our family doesn't get to rewrite history just because you developed a conscience." She turned to leave, her point made, her threat delivered. But at the door, she paused, looking back at the portrait one final time. "She was pretty," Vivian said softly, "for what she was. But pretty doesn't change class, Damien. And it certainly doesn't change blood." The door closed behind her with a finality that felt like a coffin lid. Silence crashed over the room. The twins clung to each other, confusion and fear written across their faces. Ms. Rhea's hand trembled on her phone, and Damien stood frozen, caught between the family he'd just found and the resources that could help thousands. "What are you going to do?" Ms. Rhea asked quietly. Damien looked at his daughters, their mother's eyes staring at him from two small faces, and felt the full weight of his father's legacy pressing down like gravity. What choice could a man possibly make when forced to choose between his children and his capacity to do good in the world? Midnight found Damien in his father's old office. He'd sworn never to enter this room again after the funeral. Had kept it locked for 3 years, preserving it like a crime scene because that's what it was, the place where every cruel decision that shaped the Vanden Empire had been made. But tonight, he needed to understand. Needed to see what his father had truly left behind. The desk was exactly as his father had left it. Leather chair worn in specific places. Fountain pen aligned perfectly with the blotter. And in a locked drawer, the one Damien had ignored until now, he found what he was looking for. A second will. Not the official one his lawyers had executed. This one was handwritten, dated 2 weeks before his father died, witnessed by Vivian and the family attorney who'd passed away the following year. Convenient. The language was archaic and vicious, full of clauses about protecting the family name from moral degradation and ensuring the Vanden legacy remains untainted by common associations. Common associations. That's what his father had called Alara. Damien's hands shook as he read further. The will laid out exactly what Vivian had threatened. If he pursued any relationship or legal connection to individuals of questionable background or children born outside acceptable circumstances, the entire estate would be tied up in litigation. The foundations would freeze. The medical trusts would dissolve. Everything his father had built would collapse in a legal chaos that could last decades. His phone buzzed. A text from Ms. Rhea. The girls are asking about you. They want to know if the mean lady is going to take them away. Damien typed back with fingers that felt numb. I won't let that happen. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally. Then you need a plan that isn't just stubbornness and guilt. She was right. Wanting to do the right thing wasn't enough. He needed strategy. Legal backing. Something that could counter Vivian's threat without sacrificing either his daughters or his ability to help others. He pulled out his laptop, started researching. Adoption law, inheritance disputes, moral clauses and wills. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. Vivian's case was weak legally but strong practically. She didn't need to win in court. She just needed to tie everything up long enough to make his life unlivable. Unless Damien stopped scrolling, his mind catching on a single phrase in an article about contested estates. Demonstrable harm to community interests. If he could prove that Vivian's actions would cause direct harm to the communities his foundation served, he might be able to get an injunction. Keep the foundations running while the legal battle played out. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be quick, but it would mean his daughters and his work wouldn't be mutually exclusive. He dialed his lawyer's emergency line. The man answered on the 3rd ring, voice groggy but alert. Damien? It's midnight. I need you to file for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow morning. And I need you to contact every person and organization that benefits from the Vanden Foundations. Get testimonials, impact statements, anything that shows what would happen if the money stopped flowing. What's going on? War, Damien said simply. Family war. And I need ammunition. After hanging up, he sat in his father's chair, the chair he'd avoided for years, and let himself feel the full weight of what was coming. Vivian wouldn't stop at legal threats. She'd go to the media, paint him as a man trying to buy redemption with adoption. She'd dig into Alara's past, find every moment of struggle and poverty, and use it to argue that his daughters deserved better than a father who'd abandoned their mother. The cruelty was almost artistic in its completeness. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered anyway because sleep wasn't happening tonight. Mr. Vanden? A woman's voice, older, careful. My name is Constance Webb. I was your father's house manager, the one who fired Miss Alara. Damien's grip tightened on the phone. Why are you calling? Because I've carried guilt for 8 years, Constance said, her voice breaking. And because I heard Vivian visited you today. I know what she's planning, and I can help. Ow! I have recordings, Constance replied. Your father recorded everything in his final months. Conversations, phone calls, meetings with Vivian where they discussed this exact scenario. Where he told her explicitly to use this will to control you if you ever stepped out of line. Damien stood so fast the chair rolled backward. Why didn't you come forward before? Because I was afraid. Because I'm 72 years old and I spent my whole life serving your family. But I watched Miss Alara leave that house pregnant and terrified, and I did nothing. I won't do nothing again. Can you testify? I can do better than testify, Constance said. I can give you evidence that this was created under duress and undue influence. That your father was manipulating you from beyond the grave. It might not destroy Vivian's case, but it'll weaken it enough to keep your foundations running while you fight. Damien's mind raced. What do you want in return? Nothing, Constance said softly. Except maybe you can tell those little girls that they're grandmother, because that's what I would have been if your father had any humanity. Is sorry she wasn't brave enough to help their mother. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Damien said, come to the estate tomorrow. Bring everything you have. And Constance? Thank you. After she hung up, Damien returned to the portrait hanging in his study. Stood before Alara's painted face in the darkness, with only moonlight and guilt for company. I'm going to fix this, he whispered to the canvas. I'm going to protect them the way I should have protected you. The portrait didn't answer. But somewhere in the house, he heard small footsteps. Turned to find Nora standing in the doorway, wearing pajamas Ms. Rhea must have brought from their foster home. "I had a bad dream," she said quietly. "Is it okay if I stay with you?" Damien's throat closed. He nodded, unable to speak, and watched as his daughter crossed the room and climbed into the leather chair he'd set up for reading. She curled up small, her eyes drifting to the portrait. "Mommy looks happy there," Nora observed. She was, Damien managed, "for a little while. Will you make us happy?" The question carried no accusation, just honest curiosity. "Even if it's hard?" "Yes," Damien promised. "Even when it's impossible." Nora's eyes closed. Within minutes, her breathing evened into sleep, and Damien sat on the floor beside her chair, keeping watch, while the clock ticked toward dawn and the battle that would determine everything. But outside, in the shadows beyond the estate's lights, Vivian's car idled at the gate, and the woman inside was making calls to journalists who specialized in destroying reputations with truth. How far would Vivian go to protect a legacy built on cruelty? And could Damien counter her attacks before his daughters learned exactly what kind of family they'd been born into? The envelope arrived at 6 a.m., not through the mail, hand-delivered by a courier who looked apologetic as he handed it to Damien at the front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a press release scheduled to go out in 3 hours unless Damien called Vivian and agreed to her terms. The headline read, "Real Estate Mogul's Secret Children. Love Story or Exploitation?" Damien read it twice, his coffee going cold in his hand. The article was masterful in its manipulation, never quite accusing him of anything criminal, but implying everything shameful. It painted Alara as a vulnerable employee seduced by her employer's son, painted the twins as props in his redemption narrative, painted Damien as a man buying absolution with adoption papers. Every word was technically true. Every word was also devastatingly incomplete. His phone rang. "Vivian, did you get my gift?" Her voice dripped satisfaction. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious about family legacy, Damien. You have until 9 a.m. to issue a statement withdrawing the adoption petition. After that, this story goes live on every major outlet I can reach. And trust me, I can reach many. You destroy 2 innocent children's lives to prove a point. I protect the Vanden name from scandal," Vivian corrected. "What happens to those children after is unfortunate but necessary. They'll be fine in foster care. They've survived worse." The line went dead. Damien stood in his entryway, surrounded by marble and wealth and the hollow echo of his aunt's words, and felt rage crystallize into something cold and focused. He'd spent 3 years trying to be better than his father through charity and foundations. But maybe being better meant something simpler. Fighting back. He called his lawyer, then his PR firm, then every journalist he'd ever worked with on foundation publicity. And finally, he called Constance Webb. "I need everything you have," he said, "and I need it in 2 hours." By 7:30 a.m., his team had assembled in the study. 3 lawyers, 2 PR specialists, Ms. Rhea and Constance, who arrived with a banker's box full of recordings and documents that smelled like old paper and buried secrets. The twins were still sleeping upstairs, unaware that their future was being negotiated in real time. "This is everything?" Damien asked Constance. "Everything I could save," she confirmed. "Recordings of your father discussing the will with Vivian. Emails about how to structure it to maintain control even after death. And this," she pulled out a folder. "Medical records showing your father was heavily medicated when he signed that second will. Dosages that would have impaired judgment." One of the lawyers leaned forward. "That's grounds to invalidate the entire document." "But it'll take time," another lawyer countered. "Months, maybe years. And in the meantime, Vivian's press release does its damage." The PR specialist spoke up. "We could issue our own statement. Get ahead of the narrative. Frame this as a man taking responsibility for his past instead of running from it." "That plays into her hands," Ms. Rhea argued. "Makes it look like he's admitting wrongdoing." Damien listened to them debate, watching the clock tick toward 9 a.m., toward the moment when his daughter's origin story became public property. When strangers would pick apart Alara's life and his mistakes and turned personal tragedy into entertainment. Then Nora appeared in the doorway. She wore her yellow sundress from yesterday, her hair slightly messy from sleep. Behind her, Nia clutched a stuffed bear, rubbing her eyes. They looked so small standing there, so vulnerable, and Damien realized that all the legal strategy in the world meant nothing if they grew up believing they were shameful secrets instead of cherished daughters. "Are you having a meeting about us?" Nora asked. The room went silent. Every adult suddenly finding their shoes fascinating. "Yes," Damien said, because lying to them now would be worse than any press release. "Someone wants to tell a story about you and me and your mom. A story that isn't quite true, but also isn't quite false. And we're trying to figure out how to handle it." Nia moved closer to her sister. "Will people be mean to us?" "Some might be," Damien admitted, and Ms. Rhea shot him a warning look, but he pressed on. "Some people don't understand that families come together in different ways. That love can start messy and complicated and still be real." "But we're real," Nora said, confused. "We're right here." "Yes," Damien agreed. "You're real, and that's what matters." His phone buzzed. 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes until Vivian's deadline. One of the lawyers cleared her throat. "Mr. Vanden, we need a decision. Do we fight this publicly or try to contain it quietly?" Damien looked at his daughters, at their mother's portrait on the wall, at Constance Webb, who'd spent 8 years carrying guilt and was finally trying to set it down, at Ms. Rhea, who'd brought these children to him and trusted him not to break them further. And he made a choice that would have horrified his father. "We don't contain it," he said. "We own it. All of it." He picked up his phone, ignored Vivian's number, and opened his social media accounts. Started typing with his daughters watching, his team protesting, his heart racing with the terrifying freedom of complete honesty. "My name is Damien Vanden. 7 years ago, I fell in love with a woman named Alara Daniels. She was my father's nurse. She was kind, brilliant, and brave. And when my family found out, they fired her. I said nothing, did nothing, and she disappeared, pregnant with my children, twins I didn't know existed until 2 days ago." His thumbs kept moving, the words pouring out. "Alara died 3 years ago from infection that went untreated because she couldn't afford proper care. Because the medical system my family built put profit over people. Because I chose silence over standing up for what mattered." Yesterday, her daughters, my daughters, walked into my house and recognized their mother in a portrait I'd painted from guilt. Today, my family is threatening to destroy me for trying to make this right. So here's what I want everyone to know. I will not hide my children. I will not pretend they are mistakes. I will fight for them with everything I have, even if it costs me everything I own." He hit post. The room erupted. His lawyers shouted about liability. His PR team predicted catastrophe. But Ms. Rhea was smiling, and Constance was crying, and the twins were watching him like he'd just done something brave instead of potentially stupid. Within seconds, the post started getting reactions. Hundreds, thousands, comments flooding in faster than he could read them. His phone rang. "Vivian, what have you done?" She sounded panicked for the first time. "I told the truth," Damien said calmly. "Something our family should have tried decades ago. You've destroyed yourself. The media will tear you apart." "Maybe," Damien agreed. "But at least I'll be torn apart for the right reasons. And my daughters will know I chose them." He hung up before she could respond. The lawyers were already fielding calls from journalists. The PR team scrambled to manage the incoming storm. But Damien knelt down in front of Nora and Nia, eye level again, and said the only words that mattered. "Whatever happens next, you need to know something. You are not secrets. You're not scandals. You are mine, and I am yours, and nothing anyone says can change that." Nora reached out, touched his face again like she had yesterday. "You're not sad anymore." "No," Damien agreed. "I'm terrified, but not sad." "Good," Nia said simply. "Mommy said being scared means you're doing something important." The hours that followed were chaos. Reporters gathered at the gates. Phone lines jammed with interview requests. Damien's post went viral, shared hundreds of thousands of times, debated on news channels, dissected by strangers who had opinions about love and class and redemption. But buried in the noise, something else happened. People who'd been helped by the Vanden Foundations started speaking up, sharing their stories, defending Damien not because he was perfect, but because his imperfection hadn't stopped him from trying to help. Community leaders issued statements supporting him. Nurses who'd worked with Alara came forward with memories of her kindness. And at 3 p.m., Constance's recordings were leaked to the press. Not by Damien's team, but by Constance herself, who'd apparently decided that some secrets deserved to burn. The recordings revealed everything. His father's cruelty, Vivian's manipulation, the systematic way the Vanden family had erased people they deemed unworthy. Public opinion shifted fast. By evening, Vivian's lawyer called requesting a meeting, not to threaten, but to negotiate. Because suddenly, fighting Damien meant fighting a man the public had decided to root for, a man trying to correct his family's mistakes instead of continuing them. The twins fell asleep that night in beds that had been delivered that afternoon. Proper children's beds with purple comforters and stuffed animals, installed in rooms Damien had designated as theirs while his lawyers drafted paperwork and his life transformed in real time. He stood in the doorway, watching them sleep, and felt Alara's absence like a physical wound. "I hope this is what you wanted," he whispered to her ghost. "I hope this is enough." What would morning bring? Redemption or ruin? And would Damien's gamble of honesty save his family or destroy everything he'd fought to build? 6 months changed everything. The twins started 3rd grade at Stonefield Elementary in September, their matching backpacks bouncing as they raced through the mansion's front doors each afternoon. Nora had discovered a love for reading that kept her up past bedtime. Nia had joined the school choir and sang constantly, in the shower, at breakfast, while doing homework that now spread across the dining room table like colorful chaos. The house wasn't quiet anymore. Damien had won temporary custody within 3 weeks of his post going viral. Full adoption took longer. Home studies, evaluations, meetings with therapists who wanted to ensure the girls weren't being pressured or manipulated. But every professional who interviewed them came away convinced of the same thing. These children had found their father, and he was doing everything possible to deserve them. Vivian had disappeared after the recordings leaked. Not literally. She'd retreated to the family's estate in Charleston, issuing a brief statement about misunderstandings that fooled no one. The second was invalidated. The foundations continued operating, and the Vanden legacy shifted from one of cruel control to complicated redemption. The media moved on, as media always does, to the next scandal. But the work remained. Damien had transformed the mansion's West Wing as promised. The Alara Foundation opened in August with Constance Webb as its director, a woman who understood the cost of silence and had dedicated her remaining years to making sure others never paid that price. The foundation provided free healthcare navigation for uninsured families, connected people to resources, paid medical bills that would have otherwise destroyed lives. Hundreds of people walked through its doors each week. Thousands benefited from its services. And every single one of them passed under a portrait of Alara Daniels that hung in the entrance, not as decoration, but as mission statement. Damien stood in his study now, watching his daughters play in the garden below. They'd planted flowers there last month, purple ones, because purple was Alara's favorite color according to a nurse who'd worked with her. The twins tended those flowers like they were tending their mother's memory, watering them daily, talking to them about school and friends, and their father, who was learning how to braid hair from YouTube videos. His phone buzzed. Ms. Rhea, who become an unexpected friend through this process. "How are you holding up?" He typed back, "Good days and hard days. Today's good. The girls? Happy. Loud. Completely destroying my peaceful existence. Perfect." 3 dots appeared. Then, Alara would be proud. The words hit harder than expected. Damien set down his phone, his eyes drifting to the portrait, the original one from his study, still hanging in the same place because the twins had insisted. They liked doing homework under their mother's gaze, liked telling her about their days even though she couldn't answer back. "She's not really gone," Nora had explained once. "She's just quiet now." A knock at the study door. Nia peeked in, dirt smudged on her cheek from the garden. "Daddy, can we have a sister?" Damien blinked. What? A sister, Nia repeated, completely serious. Misria said there are lots of kids who need families. And we have extra rooms. And you're good at being a dad now, so maybe we could share you. Nora appeared behind her twin. We already picked one out. Her name is Kendra. She's 5. She likes purple too. Damien's brain struggled to process. You picked out a sister? Ms. Rhea took us to the foster center last week when you were at the foundation meeting. Nora explained matter-of-factly. There was a craft day. Kendra made a butterfly that looked like mommy's flowers. We think she'd fit. You can't just pick a sibling like you're shopping. Damien started, then stopped because actually wasn't that kind of what had happened with him? Chance and recognition and a portrait that bridged grief to family? Can we at least meet her properly? Nia pressed. Please. Damien looked at his daughters, these 7-year-old forces of nature who'd walked into his life and refused to let him stay comfortable, who'd turned his mansion into a home and his guilt into purpose and his careful plans into beautiful chaos. I'll call Ms. Rhea, he said, surrendering to the inevitable. Both twins cheered, then raced off to discuss room arrangements and how they'd teach Kendra about their mom and whether purple sheets or yellow sheets would be better for someone new. Damien picked up his phone, but before he could dial, a text came through from an unknown number. Mr. Vanden, my name is Alara's sister. I just saw an article about the foundation. Can we meet? There are things about my sister you should know. Things she wanted to tell you, but never got the chance. His heart stopped. Alara had a sister. Family the twins had never mentioned, probably because they'd never known. He typed back with shaking hands. Yes. When? The response came immediately. Tomorrow. And bring the girls. They have an aunt they've never met. Damien sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the strange mathematics of family. How it multiplied when you stopped trying to control it. How loss could transform into connection if you were brave enough to let it. Outside, the twins were already planning their expanded family, debating whether Kendra would like soccer or art class or both, whether having 3 sisters would be better than 2, whether their father could handle the noise. He couldn't, but he would try anyway. That evening, after dinner and homework and the nightly ritual of reading stories under their mother's portrait, Damien tucked both girls into bed. They'd insisted on sleeping in the same room despite having their own spaces, their beds pushed together like they were still sharing the cramped quarters of foster homes. Daddy, Nora said sleepily, do you think Mommy knows we found you? I think she knows, Damien replied, smoothing her hair back. I think she's been watching this whole time. Good, Nia mumbled, already half asleep. We want her to see that we're happy now. After they drifted off, Damien returned to his study one last time, stood before the portrait that had started everything. And for the first time in 8 years, he didn't feel the crushing weight of what he'd failed to do. He felt the possibility of what came next. Tomorrow, they'd meet Alara's sister. Learn new stories about the woman who'd given him daughters and purpose and a reason to be better than his bloodline. Next week, they'd meet Kendra. See if 3 daughters fit where 2 already thrived. Next month, next year. Who knew what other ways family would find them? Because that was the truth he'd finally learned. Family wasn't about perfection or planning or controlling the narrative. It was about showing up even when terrified, especially when terrified. Thank you, he said to the portrait, to Alara, to the memory of a woman who'd saved him by leaving behind children who refused to let him stay lost, for giving me another chance to get it right. The portrait didn't answer, but in the silence of the mansion, no longer empty, no longer cold, he could almost hear her voice. Love and brave. And he would. What new connections would tomorrow bring? And how many more lives could be transformed when one family chose courage over comfort? The woman standing at the estate's entrance had Alara's smile. Damien saw it immediately, that particular curve of lips that meant kindness lived beneath whatever words came next. The twins noticed too, their hands tightening around his as they stared at the stranger who carried their mother's face in softer, older lines. I'm Shanice, the woman said, her voice catching. Alara's baby sister, though I guess I'm not so baby anymore. Nora stepped forward first, always the braver twin. You look like Mommy. She looked like me, Shanice corrected gently. I'm older by 3 years. was older. God, this is hard. Ms. Rhea had arranged a meeting, verified Shanice's identity through birth certificates and photographs that now sat in a folder on the entry table. But documents didn't prepare Damien for the way grief and joy could occupy the same expression, or how meeting Alara's sister felt like being handed pieces of a puzzle he'd thought was complete. Why didn't you come forward before? The question came out sharper than intended. Shanice's eyes filled. Because I was in Seattle. Because Alara and I had a fight before she got pregnant. Something stupid about money and pride. And by the time I tried to make things right, she disappeared. I searched for 2 years. Then I stopped because sometimes people don't want to be found. She wanted you to find us, though, Nia said suddenly. She wrote letters. Ms. Rhea showed us. I know. Shanice pulled an envelope from her purse, hand shaking. She sent me one too, before she died. It arrived 3 weeks after her funeral, forwarded through 4 different addresses. She said if anything happened to her, I should find her daughters. Make sure they knew they came from love, even when love got complicated. The twins moved closer to their aunt without prompting, drawn by something deeper than logic. Shanice knelt to their level, tears streaming freely now, and opened her arms. They fell into the embrace like they'd been waiting for it their whole lives. Damien watched his daughters find another piece of their mother, watched family expand in ways he was still learning to accept, and felt the weight of the past 6 months settle into something like peace. The mansion wasn't quiet anymore, would never be quiet again, and standing there, surrounded by the family he'd built from ruins and grace, Damien finally understood what Alara had been trying to teach him that morning in the garden 8 years ago. Love wasn't about deserving. It was about showing up anyway. That's where their story finds its footing, in the messy, beautiful work of becoming family. But every ending is just another beginning, and tomorrow brings new challenges, new connections, new chances to choose courage over comfort. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because every week we bring you true stories of resilience, redemption, and the families we choose when life doesn't give us what we expected. Drop a comment below about a time someone showed up for you when they didn't have to. Your story might inspire someone who needs to hear it today. We're all just trying to love each other brave, one choice at a time.